The gentle morning sunlight streams through the window, softly illuminating my face. As usual, I wake up before the alarm clock rings. Even at 62, the habit from my 30 years as a high school teacher is hard to shake off. "Good morning, Eleanor," my husband George greets me with a sleepy voice from beside me. At 65, he still maintains his early rising habit from his days as a police officer, even after retirement. "Good morning, George." "Another beautiful day," I smile in response as I get up from bed. I open the curtains and take in the morning view of Cedarville, Ohio. It's a small college town of about 4,000 people, but it exudes a peaceful atmosphere with its lush greenery. As I prepare breakfast, I mentally organize today's schedule. Our son Mike and daughter-in-law Sarah are heading off to work, so we'll be looking after our 2-year-old grandson, Jacob. Mike is busy as a researcher at a major pharmaceutical company, while Sarah works at a local real estate agency. Helping the young couple balance work and childcare is one of the joys of being grandparents. "George, don't forget we're watching Jacob today," I remind him. "Oh, of course. I'm looking forward to it." George looks up from his newspaper with a smile. Taking care of our grandson has become one of our greatest pleasures in life. After breakfast, I take a walk around the neighborhood. I exchange greetings with neighbors along the way. "Good morning, Eleanor." Early as always, I see Mrs. Johnson calls out while tending to her garden. "Good morning, Linda." "Your garden looks lovely," I reply. "Thank you. I'm planning to sell some of these flowers at the church bazaar," she says. It's moments like these that remind me of the strong sense of community here. We've lived in Cedarville for over 40 years, and this warm community has become our cherished home. When I return home, I receive a call from Sarah. "Good morning, Mom. We'll be dropping off Jacob soon," she says. "Of course, Sarah. Don't worry about a thing," I assure her. As I hang up, I feel a slight twinge of mixed emotions. My relationship with Sarah isn't bad, but sometimes I sense differences in our values. We occasionally disagree on small things like child-rearing methods or household role division. However, for the sake of family harmony, I always try my best to be understanding. Just before noon, Mike brings Jacob over. "Mom, thanks again for today. We'll pick him up in the evening," he says. "All right, Mike. Take care," I reply. As I embrace Jacob, I feel warmth spread through my heart at my young grandson's innocent smile. "Grandma." Jacob laughs gleefully, throwing his arms around my neck. In the afternoon, while playing with Jacob in the garden, some neighborhood children join us. The sound of children's laughter fills the air, creating a peaceful atmosphere. "Eleanor, how about some tea?" George calls from the porch. "Thank you, George," I reply gratefully. We sit on the porch, watching our grandson and the neighborhood children play, enjoying a tranquil moment together. Our retirement life is filled with these small moments of happiness. In the evening, when Mike comes to pick up Jacob, he looks a bit tired. "What's wrong, Mike? Is something bothering you?" I ask, concerned. "Oh, it's nothing, Mom. Just busy at work." He trails off. I'm a bit worried about my son's demeanor, but I decide not to press further. The young couple must have their own concerns. As I lie in bed that night, I reflect on the day. Even in our peaceful daily life, I sense small worries and changes affecting each family member. I wonder what tomorrow will bring as I quietly close my eyes. After finishing my morning routine, I was waiting in the living room for Jacob to arrive. Mike's tired appearance yesterday was still on my mind, and I thought I'd try to have a more detailed conversation with him today. Outside the window, the soft early summer sunlight gently illuminated the streets of Cedarville. Suddenly, the doorbell rang. Looking at the clock, I realized it was too early for Mike to arrive. I wonder who that could be, I thought as I headed towards the door. When I opened the door, 2 police officers were standing there. One was a man in his 50s, and the other was a younger woman in her 30s. They were both in uniform, but something felt off. "Good morning, Mrs. Thompson. We're here to discuss a matter with you," the older officer said. "Yes, what can I help you with?" I asked, feeling a bit tense. "Can we talk inside?" the young female officer asked. There was a hint of urgency in her voice that I found unsettling. I led them into the living room. As I gestured for them to sit on the sofa, they settled down with a somewhat uneasy air. "We're here on a rather delicate matter," the older officer began. His expression was grave. "What's happened?" I asked, feeling anxious. "An arrest warrant has been issued for your grandson, Jacob Thompson." The moment I heard those words, my mind went blank. "What? What did you say?" My voice rose involuntarily. Surely there must be some mistake. "Jacob is only 2 years old," I said, desperately trying to make sense of the situation. The older officer cleared his throat and said, "We understand that this is an unusual situation. However, we have our orders." Confusion and questions were swirling in my mind. An arrest warrant for a 2-year-old child. How could that be possible? Even when George was in the police force, I'd never heard of anything like this. What exactly is he being charged with? I asked, trying to maintain my composure. The young female officer answered, "We can't disclose the details, but we have information suggesting involvement in a serious economic crime." Hearing those words, I became even more bewildered. A 2-year-old child involved in an economic crime. It made absolutely no sense. This must be a mistake. Jacob is truly just a 2-year-old child. He can't even count money by himself, let alone commit an economic crime, I explained desperately. The 2 officers exchanged glances. I sensed something akin to nervousness in their demeanor. "Mrs. Thompson, we understand the unusual nature of this situation. However, we have orders from above." The older officer began, but the younger one interjected. "Actually, there is a way to resolve this situation," she said. I listened intently. "If you pay bail, we won't need to take Jacob into custody," the young officer explained. "Bail? How much?" I asked, trying to maintain my composure despite my agitation. $100,000. I gasped when I heard the amount. $100,000. Such a large sum, I couldn't possibly. We can arrange for installments. $30,000 now, and the rest can be paid later, the older officer quickly added. The feeling that something was very wrong grew stronger within me. Police procedures couldn't possibly be this simple. And the behavior of these two officers was strange. Could I have some time to think about this? I'd like to consult with my husband, I said, trying to buy some time. The two officers visibly tensed. But this is an urgent matter. I understand. But we're talking about a large sum of money. I need a little time, I said firmly. The officers reluctantly stood up. All right, we'll return in 2 hours. Please make your decision by then. As I saw them off, various questions were swirling in my mind. Was this really an official procedure? Why would there be an arrest warrant for a 2-year-old child? And were these two really police officers? After closing the door, I took a deep breath. I needed to think calmly. First, I should call George. He would know about police procedures. And I needed to contact Mike and Sarah too. As I reached for the phone, I felt a sense of unease along with a premonition that something big was about to happen. I let out a deep sigh as I hung up the phone. My conversation with George had made the abnormality of this situation even clearer. Eleanor, listen carefully. George's voice had maintained its usual calm. First of all, it's almost impossible for an arrest warrant to be issued for a 2-year-old child. Also, the police would never directly demand bail money. This is most likely a scam. Recalling George's words, I started jotting down notes. I listed the suspicious points about the two individuals posing as police officers, the slight oddity in their uniforms, their nervous behavior, their demand for immediate bail payment. As I wrote each point down, it became increasingly clear how many suspicious elements there were. Looking out the window, I saw Mrs. Johnson working in her garden. She might have noticed something. I went out to the garden and called out to her over the fence. Linda, do you have a moment? What is it, Eleanor? Is something worrying you? Mrs. Johnson approached, taking off her soil-covered gloves. I briefly explained the situation. Mrs. Johnson's expression changed to one of surprise and concern. Oh my, what a terrible thing. She frowned. Come to think of it, I did see an unfamiliar car parked earlier. It looked like a police car, but something seemed off about it. My heart raced at this information. What kind of car was it? Mrs. Johnson provided me with details. The make, color, even part of the license plate number. I hurriedly wrote it all down. Thank you, Linda. This is very helpful. Back in the house, I tried calling Mike. But there was no answer. I left several messages on his voicemail, but received no response. Anxiety spread through my chest. Next, I tried calling Sarah, and she answered immediately. What is it, Mom? There was an odd uneasiness in Sarah's voice. Sarah, something serious has happened. It's about Jacob." As I began to explain the situation, Sarah's reaction was strange. Rather than surprise or concern, I sensed something more like panic. "I see. But Mom, shouldn't you just do what the police say?" I felt uneasy about those words. The normal Sarah would have been much more agitated. "Sarah, do you know something about this?" "No. Nothing." Her voice was trembling. "Sorry, Mom. I'm at work right now. I'll call you back later." The call ended. Various questions swirled in my head. Sarah's behavior was clearly unusual. Was she hiding something? Looking at the clock, I realized it was almost time for the fake officers to return. I hurriedly began my preparations. I went over the response methods George had taught me and prepared to gather evidence. I slipped a small voice recorder into my pocket and made sure my phone camera was ready. The doorbell rang. I took a deep breath and headed for the door. In my mind, I organized all the information I had gathered. The suspicious points about the fake officers, Mrs. Johnson's testimony, Sarah's strange reaction. Before opening the door, I steeled my resolve. I had to unravel this mystery and protect my family. For the sake of my grandson Jacob, and for the truth. As I placed my hand on the doorknob, I whispered quietly, "Now, let's reveal the truth." When I opened the door, the two fake officers were standing there as expected. "Mrs. Thompson, have you made your decision?" the older man asked, unable to hide his impatience. Maintaining a facade of calm, I replied, "Yes, I've thought it over. But could you please show me the official warrant?" The two visibly flustered, exchanging glances. "Well, that's..." The younger woman stammered. "And I'd like to see your police badges as well," I said firmly. "We apologize, but we didn't bring them today." "I see. In that case, let me call the station to confirm," I said, reaching for my smartphone. The two panicked. No, that won't be necessary," the older man hurriedly tried to stop me. We'll be leaving now." With that, they hastily departed. I watched their retreating figures with a cold gaze. As I closed the door, I felt my heart racing. This gave me near certainty. But I still didn't have the full picture. That night, I received a call from Mike. "Mom, what's going on? I had a bunch of missed calls from you." I explained the situation. Mike's voice trembled with surprise and anger. "What in the world?" "I'm coming home right away, Mom." After hanging up, I was pondering if I had overlooked anything. That's when I noticed Sarah's smartphone on the living room table. She must have forgotten it in her haste to leave earlier. I hesitated. It's not right to invade someone's privacy. But now, our family's safety was at stake. Taking a deep breath, I picked up the smartphone. When I swiped the screen, it wasn't locked. Looking at the recent call history, I noticed frequent interactions with an unknown number. I pressed one of them, and a voicemail played. "Sarah, proceed as planned. I'll wipe out your debt. This is your chance to outsmart your husband and in-laws." I trembled at the man's voice. Was this the beginning of it all? But why would Sarah do such a thing? I heard the front door open. Mike had returned. "Mom, I'm home." Mike's voice was a mix of exhaustion and worry. After I explained the situation in detail, Mike's expression clouded. "Sarah, what on earth are you thinking?" Just then, the doorbell rang. When we opened it, Mr. Wilson from across the street was standing there. "Eleanor, I'm sorry for coming at this hour. But I think you should see this." What he handed over was footage from a security camera. It showed the fake officers in a secret meeting with Sarah. I thought this looked strange, so I checked it out. Don't you think this is odd? We were speechless. The evidence was clear. At that moment, the front door opened, and Sarah walked in. Her expression froze. "Sarah, can you explain this?" Mike's voice was low, controlled. Sarah collapsed to the floor. "I'm sorry. I'll tell you everything." Her confession began. She revealed her gambling addiction and the massive debt she had accumulated. She spoke of her struggling marriage and her jealousy over Mike's dependence on his parents. Finally, she admitted to being coerced into this scheme by debt collectors who were threatening her. "But I didn't really want to do it. Deceiving my family." Sarah's voice trembled. Mike let out a deep sigh. "Why didn't you talk to me? We could have solved this together." I watched the two of them with mixed emotions. Anger and sadness, but also a bit of relief. At least now, the truth was out in the open. "Well, let's report this to the police," I said quietly. "The real police, this time." With those words, the atmosphere in the room seemed to lighten a bit. A long night was coming to an end. Difficult times lay ahead, no doubt. But now that we knew the truth, we could surely overcome this trial as a family. Looking out the window, I could see the first light of dawn peeking through. It was the start of a new day. And the beginning of a new chapter for our family. As the morning sun began to softly illuminate the room, we heard the sound of police sirens approaching. The real police had arrived. We went out to the front door to greet them. "Thompson family, we apologize for the delay," Detective Johnson, a veteran officer, addressed us. "Please tell us the details of what happened." We took turns explaining the events of the past few days. Sarah's confession, Mr. Wilson's security camera footage, and the actions of the fake police officers. Detective Johnson listened intently with a serious expression. "I see, I understand the situation now," the detective nodded. "Actually, we've been seeing an increase in these types of scams recently. The perpetrators try to exploit family bonds to fraudulently obtain money. In this case, they targeted a 2-year-old child." Hearing those words, we once again realized the gravity of the situation. The unrealistic scenario of an arrest warrant for 2-year-old Jacob was a trap designed to cloud our judgment. Sarah, the detective gently addressed her. Your cooperation will be key to solving this case. Can you help us catch the culprits? Sarah nodded through her tears. Yes, I'll do anything. I don't want to lie anymore. A few hours later, the fake police officers were arrested. They were part of an organized fraud group that used tactics to extort money by exploiting family vulnerabilities. They had used Jacob's name simply because he was the youngest family member. The sheer absurdity of it had the effect of confusing the victim's judgment. Once the immediate crisis had passed, we took time as a family to face each other. We gathered in the living room, sipping tea and discussing things we hadn't been able to talk about before. Sarah, why didn't you come to us sooner? Mike asked quietly. Sarah answered with her head bowed, I was ashamed. Your parents are so wonderful, and I felt like I was a failure as a wife. So I escaped into gambling. I took Sarah's hand. You're not a failure as a wife, dear. Everyone has their own struggles. What's important is that we overcome them together. Mike nodded in agreement. That's right, Sarah. You don't have to bear this burden alone. From now on, let's talk about everything. Sarah's eyes welled up with tears at those words. I'm so sorry. Thank you. We spent a long time talking. About our feelings, our future life, and about Jacob. Slowly but surely, I could feel our family bonds being repaired. A few days later, our neighbors gathered to throw us a small party. Eleanor, you've been through quite an ordeal, Mrs. Johnson said gently. We made it through thanks to everyone's help, I replied, filled with gratitude. Mr. Wilson approached us too. I'm glad that footage was useful. If you ever need anything, just let me know. I felt a warmth in my chest, touched by the kindness of our community. In the middle of the party, Jacob came running to me. Grandma. As I picked him up, I found myself tearing up. We had all come together as a family to protect this child. That night, I stepped out into the garden alone to look at the stars. The events of the past few days flashed through my mind like a slideshow. Fear, anxiety, anger, and finally, the relief and hope that followed. I've never felt the importance of family so strongly before. There's no such thing as a perfect family. But by understanding and supporting each other, we can overcome any difficulty. That's the true strength of family. This ordeal taught me that. From inside the house, I could hear the laughter of Mike, Sarah, and Jacob. I took a deep breath and looked up at the starry sky once more. Thank you, I whispered softly. I'm not sure who I was thanking, but a definite feeling of gratitude spread through my chest. Tomorrow, a new day begins again. I'm sure it won't all be smooth sailing. But I know we can get through it together. As a family, and as members of this warm community. I quietly returned to the house. It